An onryō. No, your eyes don't deceive you. You are not the only one that walks the Corpseroad with me. They are vengeful spirits of the dead from Japan that don't tend to have the best intentions for those in the land of the living. Murderous intentions, if you aren't catching my hints. The greatest among them have even been known to cause natural disasters in your world occasionally. But where are my manners? I haven't introduced you to my lovely escort this evening. Her name is Oiwa. Granted, half of her face looks like someone pressed a hot cast iron pan to it, but I find her personality to be quite charming. I wouldn't stare at her disfigurement for too long if I were you, though. She's pretty touchy about it and may decide to disembowel you, mistaking your curiosity for an insult. Losing another traveling companion would be a pity, and I've grown quite fond of you. What's that, my dear? You'd like me to tell your story? Of course. Who am I to deny our friend a sleep filled with terror? Walk with me. Oiwa's tale begins in an Edo neighborhood of Yotsuya, more like a village of farmers and other individuals down on their luck in her time. Oiwa was born into a samurai family, but unfortunately she was not born in the best time for samurai, which boils down to practically any time except the Edo period. While I'm unclear how he became so, her father was a ronin, a masterless samurai, and her family was impoverished. In addition, she was married to another ronin named Tamiya Iemen, a charming but notoriously lazy bastard. While I typically question the logic of marrying a bum, love is strange, and I'll not fault the woman for that. To aid her family in making ends meet, Oiwa would frequent the pleasure districts in the city and do whatever she could to make money. She's reasonably mute on the specifics, but I like to think she sold feet pics at the local bars, as that is a perfect grey area of income procurement for a married woman, if only she had access to OnlyFans. I assume at some point that Oiwa's father found out about his daughter making her ass clap at the local strip club and wasn't too happy about it. But what else could she do? Her husband, Iemen, did nothing all day except drink and play NBA 2K with his boys. He barely held down a job and didn't seem to care about what she had to go through to keep food in the house. He just wanted to be a stay-at-home dad, minus the having a kid part. She was a wreck of a woman, and her marriage was horrible. She wanted a divorce, and her father ultimately agreed with her. He sent her to his home and awaited Iemen's arrival on the road outside of her house to tell him the marriage was over. Upon his arrival back to his home, wholly wasted off that gin and juice, Iemen was confronted by Oiwa's father, who told him that he would no longer allow his daughter to remain married to such a cunt of a man. Upon hearing such a thing, some men would reflect on their life thus far and consider changing their ways for their family's good. Iemen, on the other hand, just noticed that this old man was talking a big dick game, but he didn't bring big dick back up and opted to cut the old man down where he stood. After murdering his wife's father in cold blood, he realized that the rent was due in a week, and Oiwa was the only one with the cash to pay it, so he booked it to her family's house to bring her home. When he arrived, she wasn't in the mood to speak with him, but he came up with a big brain idea. He told her that he just saw her father murdered by a strange man in a hoodie, maybe that black samurai guy Nobunaga Oda used to hang out with. I'm kidding, calm down. And that he'd totally go avenge her father's death if she'd just give him another chance. Distraught at the loss of her father, Oiwa made the most foolish decision of her life and stayed with Iemen. The rent was paid, and life for her went back to being a shit sandwich with a Coke Zero on the side. Eventually the couple had a son. This would be a joyous occasion for most, but not for Iemen. Oiwa became sickly after giving birth and could no longer work. And with another mouth to feed, Iemen was forced to be a proper man and take care of them. But by the gods did he loathe that idea. He despised her and the infant and cursed his lot in life. Furthermore, how would he afford a new PlayStation next year? How could this happen to him, and what could he do to get out of this mess? Thankfully for him, help was coming in the form of a pretty young woman named had taken a liking to Iemen. I'm not sure why. The man was utter trash, but I'm guessing she was pretty ratchet herself, so she didn't mind. She just wanted Iemen's short sword all to herself, and she told her wealthy grandfather, Ito Kihei, that he needed to find a way to convince Iemen to marry her. Kihei met with Iemen and informed him of his granddaughter's desires. Kihei also stated that if he were to marry he would return to the status of a full-blown samurai and not be cursed to a ronin's petty existence. Clearly drooling over the prospect of becoming a wealthy samurai and having Uma's hot ass riding his face, Iemen was ecstatic at the proposal. But he had one problem. He was already married. He was not allowed to divorce Oiwa without cause, and leaving an ill wife and a baby alone for another woman would make him and the new family lose face in the community. The grandfather, being a doctor, had a solution to Iemen's problem. He concocted an ointment, which was actually a caustic poison, that Iemen was to take to Oiwa and convince her to take to cure her sickness. Clearly the plan was to kill her, and Iemen had no problem with that. Oiwa, trusting that her husband had her best interest in mind, took the ointment Iemen gave her and applied it to her face daily. It burned and caused her great pain, but he told her it was helping her and burning away the sickness. She didn't see the ointment disfiguring her, burning half her face and scarring her. Upon seeing her face, Iemen is disgusted and desperate to leave his marriage. Unfortunately, the cream didn't work, and it only left him with the ugliest wife in all of Edo. So Iemen comes up with another plan: adultery. Iemen contacts a friend called Takuetsu and tells him of his bargain with Ume's grandfather and his need to be rid of Oiwa. He decides to hire his friend to rape Oiwa so that he may accuse her of being a cheating slut and divorce her cleanly. Takuetsu agrees to the plan and sets out to Iemen's home. Arriving at the house with yam lube and ill intentions, Takuetsu enters the master bedroom and gazes upon Oiwa. No one, even Oiwa, knows why he decided not to rape her. Maybe he couldn't go through with the act, or perhaps because her face looked like half of an overcooked steak. We don't know. But he opted to do the right thing and tell Oiwa about Iemen's scheming, including the murder of her father. At first she didn't believe him, but then he held a mirror to her face. Oiwa hadn't seen her face in quite some time, and upon seeing it she was horrified. Frantically she attempted to comb her hair over her charred flesh, but as she did, her hair fell out in bloody clumps to the floor. At that point, poor Oiwa couldn't take it anymore. She drew a nearby sword and stabbed herself in her throat. As she lay dying, she cursed Iemen's name until she gargled out her final breath. The following day, the house's servant, Kohei, discovered her body. He ran to inform Iemen of the incident. Seeing his servant's tears of sorrow, Iemen grabbed a wine glass, placed some tears in a cup and drank them. He was ecstatic. Finally, that bitch was dead. Noting that Iemen was performing the wipe me down dance after hearing about his wife's possible murder or suicide, Kohei grew suspicious. Kohei doesn't have much of a poker face, and Iemen, knowing Kohei would snitch on him, murders him and starts to dance again. After twerking to his favorite Spotify hit list, he took the bodies of Oiwa and Kohei, nailed them to a door, and threw them into a nearby river. Honestly, that seems like an odd way to dispose of corpses, as I don't think the typical door would be enough weight to keep two bodies underwater, but I guess he couldn't afford to pay the local mafia for assistance at the time. With the bodies disposed of, he told local officials that his wife and servant were having a salacious affair and ran off together. The officials bought his story and allowed his divorce to proceed. Riches and hot bitches were now in his grasp. But unknown to Iemen, a curse was born from the death of his marriage, and it would not take long to seek him out. Iemen married the lovely Ume and settled in for a night of sushi, sake, and tentacle dildo sex. Exhausted and covered in yam lube, the newlyweds fell into a deep sleep, or at least one did. Iemen found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Like most men who can't sleep at night, he figured he'd roll over and see if his sleeping wife would be down for another game of "How deep can my finger go in your butt?" But as he turned to look at the beautiful face of Uma, he was met with the decaying visage of Oiwa, glaring and laughing at him. Freaking the fuck out, he grabbed his katana and cut the throat of the ghost. The ghost faded from the bed, and Iemen stood up, shaking from adrenaline and fear. Looking down at his bed, his mouth gaped in horror. Uma lay clutching her throat, blood spurting and pooling on the sheets. He ran over and placed his hands on the laceration to slow the bleeding, but it was futile. The cut was too deep. Ume's eyes closed for the last time, and Iemen sat covered in her blood with the sounds of sadistic laughter echoing from the shadows in the night. Iemen opened the door to leave and seek the aid of Ito Kihei, but on the other side, the corpse of Kohei stood before him, holding his entrails in his hands and maggots crawling out of holes that his eyes once occupied. Yemon slashes at the abomination, cursing it as the corpse of Kohei laughs at him, spewing insects and bile from its wound as it falls to the ground. Yemon clearly hadn't caught on to the game being played on him. However, when he looked closer at the man on the earth, he saw the body of Ito Kihai staring back at him. Yemon had now killed his new wife and the man he owed his new life. He would be labeled a murderer, because who would believe him when he tells them that he was swinging at the ghost of his dead wife and servant? He saw a putrefied hand creep onto his right shoulder. He turned to look and saw the pale eyes of Oiwa gazing into him, chilling his soul. Silence. Silence for who knows how long as she stared at him. Then she laughed. Low laughter that grew louder until Eamon's ears felt like they would burst. Eamon fled from Oiwa and away from the area, hoping to escape the onryō. But it was all for naught. Wherever he went, Oiwa followed. She haunted his dreams, preventing him from sleeping. He'd see her face in the paper lampshades that lit the streets of Edo. Her voice would call out to him in quiet moments, telling him about how many dicks he'd be sucking in hell, and that she shits in Oom's mouth in the spirit world just for the giggles. Eamon eventually isolated himself in a mountain cabin, thinking he'd be rid of Oiwa there. But Oiwa's Google Maps app was up to date, and it didn't take long for her to arrive and start kicking him in the dick as he slept. Eamon was driven to madness and began ripping his hair out and cutting his balls off. Oiwa, after making tempura sushi out of his testicles and savoring her work, finally decided to cut the cunt some slack. By slack, I mean she tossed him off the nearest cliff she could find, put on a pair of aviator shades, and walked off howling into the night. And that is the tale of Oiwa. As you can tell from the grin, she is pretty amused by the paleness on your face. But don't worry, she likes you, or she'd have taken your genitals by now. Now, we are going to go get some sushi. So our time together ends on that note. Until next time.